I'd like to welcome you and Dick for Dick Doughton, Dr. Dick Doughton, who wrote the book, I Am Not My Thoughts, and we are doing the Book of the Month Club from Counseling to Change. It's a counseling service, but the book is excellent for all of us to read as far as getting our mental health ideas and thoughts kind of analyzed and seeing if this is the way we want to think, or maybe change our mind into thinking something different, which always improves us if we choose thoughts that that we want within our mind. Mm-hmm. So we are in part 2 of the book, and part 2 of the book is let's stop playing the deadly blame game. Mm-hmm. And so with that, Dick, can you explain to us what that blame game is and how deadly it is? Just what the thoughts sound like to us in our own head that blames, and how deadly those thoughts are to us.
Well, we got blamed for things when we were growing up. Some things we may have done, maybe we didn't do. And we blamed other people for things, particularly if we had a sibling. So I think we all know blaming. I don't know that we know what's going to be exposed in this part 2. First chapter of part 2 is suicide victims murdered. So here's a deadly blame game. Somewhere along the line, somebody has been blamed for something, or has thoughts of self-blame, as we can be self-condemning. As the next chapter, chapter 6, is called the Judging Virus Epidemic. So we get infected by this judging virus. It then turns and judges others. It judges us. Blame, blame, compare, compare. I am good, I'm bad, you're good, you're bad. And when you get down to it, you know, all war is pointing the finger at somebody. And usually then we've got 2 countries or 2 groups of people pointing fingers at each other. We've just gone through a political election, and we all heard blame, 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 and we'll continue to. It's so epidemic, endemic. I mean, it's just, we're not born with it, but boy, it doesn't take long until those judging viruses just take over our minds. And it's hard to discern them for a long time, but we really have to want to change. And then equally hard to substitute healthy relationship thoughts for the judging thoughts, whether they're healthy thoughts about ourselves or healthy thoughts about others. And when you look at the 2 great commandments, if you want to put it in the context of a biblical teaching, when it says, love God with all your heart, but love your neighbor as yourself, well, here is a substitute for judging and condemning. If you're loving your neighbor, you're not judging and condemning them. If you're loving yourself, you're not judging and condemning yourself. So that's the way a substitute would then work for the virus. And as you practice and work and stay on the job of doing substitutes like that, then you gain ground, gain power over the enemy, which is a thought, a series of thoughts, a pattern of thoughts in our minds. And that's the way you find yourself getting healthier.
You know, I found this this section from the spontaneous evolution. Could you read that to us? I just thought that it, and kind of explain it to everyone.
So each of the 5 parts of the book, I put a quote from somebody. And a book that was really important to me in the last 10, 15 years is the one called Spontaneous Evolution. And so the quote here to start part 2: "We have been shackled with emotional chains wrought by dysfunctional behaviors programmed by the stories of the past." So that is quite a sentence. It's quite a mouthful. I think I'll just read that sentence one more time. So we, you and me, have been shackled, bound up, with emotional chains, so just like handcuffs and whatever, wrought or put there by dysfunctional behaviors. So we've talked about dysfunctional families. Well, dysfunctional families have dysfunctional behaviors. So those behaviors include judging each other and programmed by the stories of the past. So it's all stories of the past. That's all we have to think with, is stories of the past. Did you know that? We don't have stories of the future to think with because it hasn't happened yet. We just have stories of the past. And depending upon how those stories affected those around us or affected us, those are the stories that keep working. And if we're shackled as a young person, we stay shackled until we find that those thoughts are not us and we learn how to take the shackles off. Next sentence. Through forgiveness, we unshackle ourselves and others, allowing all of us to get out of the old story. So forgiveness, what a key. Forgiveness. And we're going to talk more about forgiveness, particularly when we get into the judging virus chapter. But forgiveness is a belief. It's a belief that you and your behaviors were a result of being shackled by old programming. And I forgive you, the individual. I forgive you, the soul, for that, because it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Then, and only then, will we be free to create our positive future. If we can't learn to forgive, we're not going to be free. It ain't going to happen. At least that's what I've learned and what I'm willing to stand by and pass on to you and anybody else.
So to be able to forgive, you have to understand basically that I am not my thoughts.
Yes. And neither is she, and neither is he, and neither are they, or neither were them back in the day. They were not their thoughts either. Their thoughts had control over them, just like we have thoughts that control our emotions, our thoughts, our behaviors, beliefs. Powerful stuff.
Yes, I mean, when we come down to it, that the next section is suicide victims are murdered.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that particular phrase, can you tell us a little bit more about how they are murdered and how victims they are?
Yeah, I should start by saying all suicides are not the same. There are some folks that are in terminal situations that there is not a way for them to ever, according to 2 or 3 physicians, ever get out of their pain and have any chance of quality of life. And they are given permission to end their life. So it's suicide, but it's not because of some self-condemning or misunderstanding about who they are, or people don't love them, things like that. It's a very medically driven situation. So that's one kind of suicide. Then there's the person or people that are very, very old, and they know that things are happening to people around them that are ending up costing lots of money and putting people in sterile environments away from their family members, and they just make a decision to die with dignity before that happens. It's suicide, but it's kind of a different category of why. And then you've got your people in war who are willing to go into a situation of battle knowing that they're not going to come out alive. Well, something else may have killed them, but they knew what the consequence was going to be when they did that. So, so many different ways to look at this. Hey, we can even look at the guy that went to the cross. I mean, evidently he knew that he was going to be put on a cross, and he said, no, let it happen, no, let it happen. Well, if you walk into something knowing what's going to happen and you don't do anything to try to stop it, maybe somebody else is in a sense pulling the trigger, but could you call that suicide? It's a little dicey to do that, but just think about it. So then we have the usual category of us when we're faced with personal problems, emotional situations, dysfunctional relationships, and we feel hopeless and helpless, and the world would be better off without us, and all these different thoughts that come in. And those thoughts, then, if suicide has been introduced into our thinking, can latch onto that word suicide, and, well, you're not going to commit suicide. We don't even use the phrase commit suicide anymore, technically, but that's what the thought might tell us, that we can kill ourselves, because the thought doesn't want you to separate it from you, so it wants it to make it sound like it's you. Well, they succeed. Those thoughts succeed many times. I mean, I was sitting with a guy having a discussion one evening, and the next day I get a call from his wife that he shot himself, dead. It had all been planned. He had known about it for 6 months, and here we were having a conversation the night before. He didn't tell me. I didn't know anything. So it's, a lot of things happen when we don't know what's going on in somebody else's mind. And often there's not a letter or a way to really find out. So my point in this chapter is to say that thoughts have produced this outcome, and it's the thoughts that have put us in a deadly situation. So it's going to take alternative thoughts, again, substitute thoughts, to get us out. And sometimes those thoughts are things we've already had programmed in and come up out of our own subconscious. Sometimes they're a book we might happen to be reading, or a TV show, or a movie, or a friend, or it's hard to say exactly what comes up to rescue us, in a sense, from this line of thinking. But there's a phrase at the end of that chapter, the more you think upon a thought, the stronger it gets within your mind. So depending upon how much a suicide thought has worked, it'll either be stronger or not so strong. And if you happen to encounter someone that is saying they're thinking about it, one of the first questions I was told from a workshop on suicide is to ask them how they're going to do it. Because that lets you know, in a sense, how much that thought has gone through their mind. Have they gone through it enough to plan? Do they have the tools available? Do they have a timeline? Da-da-da-da. Or is it just, oh, well, I don't know. I thought maybe. And then you say, oh, good. Let's have breakfast. Let's talk. Let's get together. So that's another little piece of that. And I'm going to have to mention this, Jan, but there's a lot of Christian type ministers and believers that think that suicide is somehow an unforgivable evil. And so there's a series of questions in this chapter that were actually added to the initial pamphlet. The initial pamphlet for this was written back in the early 90s, 90, 91, 92, when we had 6 suicides within about a 3-month period here in the Jeff City area. One of them being that gentleman that I had a discussion with the night before. Another being a boy in middle school, or I guess it was 9th grade, at the high school, and happened in his earth science class. So I have a little bit of his story in the back of the book. But there's some questions for ministers or believers that I think would be helpful for people to go through and find their own personal answers, because judging and condemning someone that has died of suicide is not helping you, and it's certainly not helping them, nor their families that are grieving. It just shows that you do not understand. Even Jesus' own words, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The very beginning of this chapter starts, do you do things that you don't want to do? So when you get down to it, probably that individual, that soul, doesn't want to end their life. They want the solution to the problem. They just don't see a solution appearing in time to save them from that result. So, a lot of compassion for people that are wrestling with those thoughts, feelings, that circumstance, and for the people who have lost loved ones to that.
Thank you for giving us that. Also, I always will suggest that 988 is a number that you can call. It's a suicide hotline number. For more information, people there can help you. If you feel like you will injure yourself, or you know someone, always call 988. That there are people very qualified to help you through your problem solving, and then on to a better life and a fuller life than what those thoughts are telling you. There's one last segue in this book about the judging virus. And I thought maybe we could just chit-chat a little bit about that virus and how it affects us.
Well, Jen, actually, we've talked about it before in earlier sessions, but it's just something, it's a thought that we get infected with as a child. And just like a virus in a physical sense it's nothing personal. The virus is just trying to live and do its thing and multiply and spread. So the same with a judging thought. It's nothing personal. It just gets inside our mind and it'll judge us or anybody else. It just wants to multiply and live. That's the nature of a judging virus. And so this whole section on suicide, that pamphlet mentions a virus that we get infected with. So back in the early 90s, we were using that particular language and just didn't necessarily call it the judging virus at the time. But so that's the language I'm using now, and it makes the most sense. And so that chapter on the judging virus, it gets into a number of things, including the forgiveness and consequences and control, and we probably ought to spend a little more time on it than we have right now.
Okay, so I know that we have, a commandment, even in the Christian religion, that judge not, lest ye be judged. Maybe some people don't even understand exactly what that is, but I thought maybe you could give us a little segue about what a judging thought sounds like within our mind, and so that we can identify it if we have thoughts like that.
Here's one. I'm a sinner. You're a sinner. Really? Is that who I am? Is that who you are? I am a sinner? We get labeled with things like that from early days, particularly as obviously in churches. And then we get told, and you can't stop sinning ever until you die. Whoa. Well, good luck, folks, ever getting rid of a judging virus, ever being able to fulfill the commandment, judge not, if you're already told you're never going to be able to stop sinning. That's a judging virus that says that. Well, you don't have power over all of that. That's a judging virus that says that. You see, that's part of the way the judging works. It puts you down, makes you inferior. Somebody else is superior. Oh, only Jesus can do that. Huh? See the comparison? Judging virus, always comparing. And then maybe you think you're better than somebody else. Well, I didn't do that. They're worse than me. Oh, there you go, comparing. That's all we're talking about, a judging virus. It just has all this language, particularly in the church. Particularly. It's so sad. I mean, what did Jesus say? Go and sin no more. What did John say? He that's born of God does not commit sin. Evidently, some people thought you could stop sinning, but maybe you ought to check that out. See why you either can't or can. All right.
Well, I want to hold up this book. I am not my thoughts. So there's a segue into this about I am not those thoughts. And if I'm not those thoughts, I have a chance to get rid of them. I'd suggest this book for all of us. So very, very good. Thank you, Dick. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Jan. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And to be with you all again. Thank you.